Okay, we are back with our second video, beginning with the Revolution of 1830 in France. I think I started to talk about it and then it cut me off. These videos can only go in 15-minute segments, so I just learned that. Now, switching gears, back to France. We touched on, or I touched on before it cut me off, Charles X coming to power in France in 1824, and he was an absolutist ruler, which of course is not going to sit well with the people of France, in particular because think about why they had the French Revolution in 1789 in the first place, was to get rid of absolutism, and now here you go, the Congress of Vienna and the powers that be in Europe are trying to put absolutism back in place. He suspends legislature, which is something that the liberals were very proud of, so they did not like it when Charles X suspended legislature. He limited the right to vote. Again, liberals are going to be very upset at this. And then he restricted the press, which is a very common thing to do in a absolutist monarchy system. Now, the liberals and the radicals revolt big time here, and they take to the streets. You can see a picture over here. They shoot soldiers. People are dying. The streets are barricaded. They're blocked. Eventually, Charles X was abdicated, meaning he basically was forced to leave. He goes to England. And a man named Louis Philippe takes over as the citizen king. You have a lot of Louis in France that become king. And he is called the citizen king for one reason. He owes his throne to the people, guys, and that means that he was the people's choice. He was who the people of France wanted. And he plays this up. I mean, there's no doubt that this guy plays his politics. He would go around dressing like let me actually take you back a second. Just a little background on Louis Philippe here. He was a big supporter of the French Revolution when he was really young back in 1789. He was kind of like in the movement. He was like one of those young people that really liked everything that was going on and supported the revolution. So people remember that about him. So they're like, "Oh yeah, okay, this guy will, he'll like the lower class, he'll like the bourgeois, he'll side with us." Well, he does just that, at least on the outside. He plays up these politics right here very nicely. He dresses like a member of the bourgeois. He walks around the streets. This is something a king has never done before. He walks the streets. He shakes people's hands. He smiles at them. He says, "How are you doing?" He's a politician. He does what he needs to do politically to get the votes, to get people to like him. So he owes his throne to the people because the people wanted him in. So he kind of is forced to play the politics. He favors the middle class, and the bourgeois prospers with Louis Philippe. So there you have the Revolution of 1830, in which an absolutist ruler, Charles X, gets ousted or abdicated, and a citizen's king takes over. Now, switching gears a little bit into Belgium. I don't know if you guys, because there's a lot of different revolutions around this time, 1830, 1848. We focus on the ones in France, but there were others. Now, in Belgium, if you remember, in the Congress of Vienna, it had that Congress had united Belgium with the Netherlands. Why? To limit French expansion. Reason being, again, Napoleon had immediately taken these places when he became emperor. So what did the Congress of Vienna want to do? They wanted to make sure that didn't happen again, so they made them more powerful by uniting them. Well, there's a big problem with this, as you can see, problem. Belgium, they are French-speaking Catholics. The Dutch obviously speak Dutch, and they are Protestant. Now, here's the issue. When we talked about nationalism, common heritage, common language, common culture, sometimes even a common religion, does this match up? No, not at all. These two things are opposite, so they're not going to like each other. And so what's going to happen is the Belgian soldiers fought the Dutch, and Belgium gains independence 1831. Belgium independence in 1831. Switching gears to Poland. Poland also wanted to try to gain some independence, so they try to revolt, and we're not going to touch on this very long. They tried to revolt against Russia. Didn't work. It was crushed. And that was sort of that for Poland. They continually are not able to break through and become independent. Now, switching back to France, from 1830 to 18, well, right at first when Louis Philippe is the king, and we'll just kind of add that in for a second here. Louis is king, and he's, remember, the citizens' king. Everything was going smooth, and all of a sudden, economically, we take a turn for the worst, and we have what's called a recession. This recession, bread prices go up again for what is the second time that this has happened. So people are beginning to get a little bit uneasy in France, I guess you could say there. And what happens is the government tries to come in and kind of silence all the critics, because people begin to start talking bad about the government. And they have every right to talk bad about this government, because factories shut down, people lost their jobs, there were poor harvests. Again, bread prices rose, just like I said, and newspapers began to blame the government officials for all these problems. So guess what, guys? Conditions are just like they were back in 1789. And a recession begins in France, right here. Radicals, socialists, and liberals call for reform up here. And the first part of the revolution is called the February Days. The February Days. Essentially what happens is opposition grows to Louis Philippe. And he refuses to listen to the middle class or the workers or the peasants. He becomes kind of stubborn. And crowds began to revolt on the streets and take to the streets. And he actually gets abdicated as well. So Louis Philippe gets abdicated, and then liberal, socialist, and radical leaders actually briefly take over France, very briefly, and they form what's called the Second Republic. The First Republic, if you remember, was way back in 1792 during the French Revolution. Then you have a period in March after February where this kind of revolution actually spreads into Germany and in Berlin, and people take to the streets there, and it's just not a good situation in Europe. Finally, we switch to June, which is kind of the second part of the revolution. 4 months later, in June, a bunch of workers took to the Paris streets, angry protesters. They didn't like what was going on with the Second Republic, and well, this revolt doesn't go so well for the workers. 1,500 get killed in the first 2 days, right here, in the first 2 days. And what happens is the workers and the socialists take to the streets. Problem with this is, number one, the bourgeois and the upper class are trying to stop them. But number two, the peasants get involved, and they actually try to stop the socialists. Why? The peasants feared that the socialists would take their land. Because remember, socialism, shared ownership. The peasants wanted to keep the little that they actually had. So this actually causes the socialists to lose that revolution. So France comes very close, guys, in this to becoming socialist. If it were, you could argue that if it weren't for the peasants, France could have become socialist. Now, what are the results of this? Causes and effects. Well, in 1948 we have, or in 1848, excuse me, again, what's called a National Assembly, in which they kind of decide here, hey, here's what we're going to do with our government. Before we get to this right here, let me just talk for a second about some causes of the Revolution of 1848, some immediate causes. Of course, long-term causes, the Enlightenment, nationalism, liberalism, poverty in the Industrial Revolution. But immediate causes, uprisings in Paris, economic recession, poor harvests, corrupt government, and this causes some immediate effects. A new republic in France being the most immediate effect. The new republic in France, they are going to issue a new constitution that has a one-house legislature. So can't really have a lot of checks and balances with one house. They're gonna put in a very strong president, and they are going to say that there is male suffrage, meaning all males have right to vote. Okay? Who is this person that is going to be the strong president? None other than another Napoleon. Napoleon III. He was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. He wins the French presidential election. And then once in office, he sort of tries to kind of do what his uncle does, which is use his power to proclaim himself emperor. You will see that he is not nearly as good as his uncle was, so we don't necessarily have to worry about France becoming another empire. But it's just important to know that it is the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte who becomes the king of France. Or actually the president of France, excuse me. They are now calling this president. Now, switching gears again. Austria has a revolt. Metternich, who is the chief minister of state in Austria, he resigned among a lot of liberal students revolting. Remember we talked about college-age students. They tend to be more supportive of Enlightenment-type principles. And so Metternich, of course, supports the old order. He gets ousted. Also in Budapest, which is in Hungary, Hungarian nationalists are also going to rebel from the Austrian Empire. And eventually the Austrians are going to regain control of these places, like Vienna, like Prague, like Budapest. But it's important to know, because this is foreshadowing something before World War I, that the people in the Austrian Empire are not very happy with who is ruling over them. And all that, again, stems from nationalism. Now, Italian and German territory. The Italian nationalists wanted to end Austro-Hungarian domination. Problem was, many of the initial Italian revolutions fail. Eventually, Italy will become its own nation, but this doesn't happen for a little while. Also, in German territory, young German nationalists began to want more national unity, more liberal reforms. It goes very, very far, and Germany almost becomes a state in 1848. And actually, Germany actually becomes a state, anybody know, in 1871. But they come very close to becoming, or why did I say state? Nation. They come close to actually becoming a nation in 1848 at a big German states meeting, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. During this meeting, Frederick William IV, or actually that's Frederick William, as you would pronounce it in Germany, he's offered the crown from the people to become the leader of Germany, and he rejects it because he says the crown was from the gutter. What do we mean by crown from the gutter? This means that it came from the people, and he did not want to be crowned king by all the common people. He wanted to become king by the rich elite people. So this was kind of sort of a kind of conceited thing to do and say right here. Why did all these revolutions fail in Italy, in Germany, or in German territory, in Poland, in Vienna, Hungary, etc.? Why did they all fail? Well, one important thing to keep in mind, the kings were too powerful. The rulers were able to use military force on the people. Also, the revolutionaries did not yet have all the support they needed, the mass support. But this is coming very soon. And as you can see down here, eventually, liberalism, nationalism, socialism is going to gain a lot of strength through political activity. And you are going to see that getting close to World War I, these revolutions start to succeed and be successful, and that's when things get scary. This concludes Europe. Our next little mini video is going to be on revolutions in Latin America.